And welcome to Around the Ozarks Spotlight. Each week, we uncover the stories behind the people in Southwest Missouri who have entrepreneurial spirit, who work to better the lives of others, or put pen to paper to write books about the stories and history of the Ozarks and its people. I'm your host, Scott Meier, and today we're going to explore the world of the Missouri Department of Conservation. And with me is the media specialist for the Southwestern region, Francis Skalicky. And
You said it right,
well, I
Scott.
got it
Very
right
good.
there, Francis. But if the world saw, well, the world can see it on the screen. If they saw how your name is spelled, somehow the Bohemian pronunciation of a C is S.
Yes, when you have those Eastern European roots, you can take a little liberty with pronunciation rules.
Well, I'll tell you, I worked early in my career for a guy I love dearly named John Mayasich, and you can take it from where he's from. So
There you go. Yeah,
that's,
yeah,
and he's a hell of a hockey player. So
yeah. There
whatever
you
that
go.
means.
Yeah, yeah.
So when someone at the station brought me your name and said you wanted to talk about some things with the Missouri Department of Conservation, I thought there's a whole gambit there that I'm sure folks would like to know more about. And I hope we can start with who is Francis Skalicky and how long have you been with the Department of Conservation?
Well, I am. I grew up in Southwest Missouri. I grew up on a small dairy farm just south of Bolivar. Graduated from Southwest Missouri State University, and I know now it's Missouri State University, but I do say back when I was there, it was Southwest Missouri State University.
Sure.
Actually worked in newspapers for 11 years, and 5 of those were at the Springfield News Leader.
Okay.
I've been with the Missouri Department of Conservation since 1996. I'm the media specialist, and what that basically means is that I work with the media in the Southwest region. Obviously, I work with other parts of the state too, but my primary focus, newspapers, radio, TV in the Southwest part of the state. As far as the Missouri Department of Conservation is concerned, we're the Fish Forest and Wildlife Agency of the state. Very good agency to work for. I always say one of the things that really makes my job enjoyable is that people understand the value of our natural resources. They get it.
Sure.
Especially here in Southwest Missouri. I mean, we have the lakes, the hunting opportunities, the camping, the hiking. We have some beautiful outdoors here, and people understand what it takes to keep them beautiful. So it always makes your job easier when people appreciate the messages you're trying to get out.
And I think, and I'm glad you covered that. I think sometimes, like a lot of things in Southwest Missouri, people take things for granted, like the beauty that we do have, and it's pretty amazing. I had to live for a previous job in the East Coast, and you realize in a big hurry how far you have to go to get away from people, or just to get into some sort of serenity or beautiful setting outside of bricks and mortar, right?
Right.
Here, you don't have to go, 2 minutes out of the city limits in Springfield, and you can be in some of the finest, most beautiful farm country anywhere in this part of the country.
You bet. And and there is a value from an economic side to the natural resources we have, but there's also a therapeutic value, and that's a very important value too. I mean, there is emotional ties to the land. There is a relaxation involved. I mean, all you have to do is go to someplace like the Springfield Conservation Nature Center, which is a Department of Conservation facility in the southeast part of town. Walk those trails. Even though you're all around, businesses are all around, traffic's all around, you get out on those trails, you go, you relax, you unwind. Yeah. And while you're at the nature center, make sure and sign up for some of the programs and stuff too. But getting back to your point, yes, the outdoors here, we're very close to some very special places, some very special things.
Oh, that's so true. Now, it must break your heart being a former news leader, reporter. You were a reporter?
I was a sports reporter, yes.
Okay. So when you drive by that facility, the vacant facility, it's got to break your heart a little bit.
Scott, that's a whole nother show, I tell you. Yeah, I'm not demeaning anything that's happening now, but yes, I grew up print journalist background. I mean, the print was, and yes, the newspaper was a pillar of every community here in Springfield and every other community. And it's not just a news leader. I mean, to see what's happening to the industry. And I know, it's a cultural change, you can call it a societal change. But yes, for me, who grew up with the value of the print word, newspapers, and you can extend that to magazines. Yeah, it's it is, it's a little sad. It is. So
It's different, and I think we could both
yeah,
agree on that.
I'm glad you said that's a good way to put it. It's different, you know.
It's
And
different.
again, I'm not saying anything about the way things are now. I shouldn't be, but it is different. So
Well,
yes,
we're here to talk about conservation,
yes,
so
yes, yes.
we'll hold that for another show.
A
Actually, that'd
whole
be
other show, Scott. Yes.
yeah, that could be an excellent topic. My guest right now is Francis Skalicky, and Francis is the head of media for this part of the state, right? For the
Right,
Missouri
correct.
Department of Conservation. Now that encompasses a lot of things, the Department of Conservation. But you went from being in the print business, going to school, I take it, with a journalism major or
Yep.
communications major, and here you are working for the Department of Conservation. How did you make that move, going from the printed word into a state job?
Well, it was a gradual transition. I mean, I grew up. I love sports, you know, and I grew up. And in my early days in newspaper, I covered basketball, baseball, football, you know, all the high school stuff.
Sure.
And then when I was at the News Leader, in addition to covering that stuff, they also had an outdoors recreation beat that they let me or that they asked me to do, and I started doing that. That's how I connected with the Missouri Department of Conservation, and just the more I saw, the more I liked. And then in the fall of 1995, they said they had an opening for a media specialist here, and I applied and I got it, and the rest is history.
Well, congratulations, and obviously it feels good. It's a good job, right? You like
Right.
what you do.
It's and again, it's like what I say, that people understand why what I'm talking about is important. That makes it so much uh, and more enjoyable. But the people I work with so many experts. I mean, after 27 years on this job, I still sit in meetings and people will say something about what deer do or what catfish do or whatever, and I'm just, what they just say? What? I've never heard that before. What they do? What? So it's just the level of expertise that I work with
Sure.
is very impressive. And again, that makes my job very easy, because when you're surrounded by experts, you can't help but look smarter. So
Well, that's true. Let everybody else be the smartest people in the room, right? And you can
exactly.
actually learn something when you do
That's
that.
right. That's
My
right.
guest is Francis Skalicky. Francis is head of media for the southwestern part of the state with the Department of Conservation. Now, a big part of the reason we're having a conversation today is to talk about something that's near and dear to your heart right now, which has to do with pollination and pollinators.
Right.
And even though I think I have some idea where you're going with this, you certainly are the expert. So why don't you take off a little bit with that lead in? Why are we talking about pollinators? What's the point?
The point is that a lot of pollinating insects populations are declining. And when people think pollination, they think butterflies and bees and pretty flowers. But there's a whole crop production side to this too. I mean, a lot of your fruits, some of your vegetables, they are pollinated too. There was a study done by Cornell University that over $20 billion, the pollination accounts for over $20 billion of the U.S. ag industry. That's from pollinating insects.
Wow.
So, and it's stuff like I have some stuff written down here, like bumblebees pollinate potatoes. Bumblebees pollinate pumpkins. Honey, mason bees and bumblebees pollinate apples. So it's all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
That there's an agricultural side to this too. And when those populations start to decline, which there's a number of reasons they're declining, well, obviously that benefit declines with it. So it's not just, and I will say flowers are part of it. I mean, the more diversity we have, the better landscape we have. But
Mhm.
it's not just about pretty flowers. It's about valuable crops that are benefited by the pollinating works of these insects. And as the insect populations decline, the pollination work declines. And so it's just a ripple effect that can have bad results.
So are you calling attention to the fact that could be an issue, or the fact that this is an issue?
It is an issue. Yes. And I'm glad you made that clarification. For instance, the monarch butterfly, which is kind of the poster species of pollinating insects. they think in North America that insect, the monarch butterfly, has declined by 90%.
By 90%.
90,
Wow.
90%.
Okay.
Now it is not too far that it can't come back, but it needs help. So that's what the call to action of our pollination information campaign is about. Get people to plant native plants. Get people to improve their habitat. And the big thing is with the native plants. And it's not just 40 acres of native plants. It can be a flower garden in the city. It can be, a flower bed beside your driveway. Little things make a difference too. This is one of those things where little things make a difference too, because little bits of habitat, if you have enough little bits, guess what? You have a big bit. And the same thing, obviously in rural areas, you can have larger packs, but the main thing, we need more of these native plants to provide habitat for, and it's not just monarch butterflies. As I said, that's kind of the poster species, and that's a good one. They're in severe state of decline. There's a number of bee species that are in decline. And some of our native bees are actually, people think honeybees. Honeybees actually aren't native to North America. They were brought here in the 16, 1700s, I think. But they're a valuable pollinator, and they're not doing well. But there's a lot of native bee species that also do pollination work, that because of overuse of insecticides, destruction of their habitat, a lot of these bees live in the ground. Their populations are hurting too. And getting back to the pollinating plants, obviously, if they can't find the plants they need to complete their life cycle, which is pollination is part of it, they're in trouble too.
Let's talk a little bit about native plants. When you're speaking of native plants, I planted some milkweed here at my home, and I know that's is one that I think the monarchs enjoy. And I've planted some bee plantings that attract bees as well as hummingbirds. But at the end of the day, what are some of the native species beyond milkweed that you would think that somebody that is in an urban environment can make a difference?
There's blazing star. There's several species of aster. There's coneflowers. The best thing to do, there's a website called Grow Native, which is we're a partner with, where the Missouri Department of Conservation is partnered with the group. You go to the Grow Native site, and they give you a bunch of species that are native to this region. And, it's not just, or you can go to the Springfield Conservation Nature Center. You can come to our Southwest Regional Office. We have a lot of literature, or you can go to the website. We have literature about plants that are native to this region. And, the native plants, they have several values. Number one, from the pollinator standpoint, which is what we're talking about, they are the plants that these insects are connected to help with their life cycle. From the human enjoyment standpoint, since they are native, in other words, they are indigenous to this region, to the climate, to the soil, to all the things we have that help them grow in pre-settlement times, a lot of times they'll grow easier because they are used to being here. You don't have to use as much fertilizer. You may not have to use as much water. And, people think native plants are not as pretty. You can have just as much color. You can have just as much variety as, with your plants. So the big thing, the short answer to your question, when you're thinking about native plants, there are a variety. Like I said, blazing star, coneflower, those are some of the things that come up. Go to either our Department of Conservation website or go to someplace like the Nature Center and get some literature. They can get you set up with plants, and they can give you planting information. We have some plant sales coming up this spring in March, and I don't have it in front of me, but again, go to the Nature Center. You can find out there are several native plants programs coming up in March, because March leads to April, which leads to May, and all this stuff. That's the planting time of year. So March and April and May is the time they have these native plant programs. So,
well, this is a good time for a natural break. We'll be back in a moment with more on Around the Ozarks Spotlight. I'm your host, Scott Meier, and we'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to the second half of today's Around the Ozarks Spotlight. I'm your host, Scott Meier. With me is Francis Skalicky, and Francis is the Department of Conservation for the state of Missouri's media specialist in this part of the state. So that would suggest there's more of you.
Right. Yeah, there are, let's see, there's I guess we do 5. There's a media specialist in Kansas City,
Mm-hmm.
specialist in St. Louis, a media specialist in Cape Girardeau, and a media specialist in Columbia.
Well,
So
I'm a little partial to this part of the state. You got the best region.
yes, and I add, if you want to get jurisdictional here, the Southwest region, which I'm the media specialist for, is 17 counties. If you chunk off 17 counties in this part of the state, I'd have that media. So that's Springfield, that's Joplin, that's all the little weeklies and the radio stations and stuff like that. That's who I work with.
Okay.
But I also work with media in other parts of the state as, specific jobs come up. I write some for the magazine. That's the thing about this job. I mean, I am connected with other parts of the state, and we touched on this before, but I'm always learning. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
It truly is nature, the outdoors, the natural resources. The one thing you find out about that is the more you learn about them, the more you learn that there is to learn. I mean, it's kind of like a cone that just keeps spreading out. And so it's a great, I don't know how many ways I can say this, but it's a great job. And I really enjoyed it for 27 years.
Well, it's certainly in your voice and in your look. So that's the beauty of video. People can see your enthusiasm as well as hear it. My wife and I just got back from a trip to Guadalajara, Mexico. We were visiting the sister city, Tlaquepaque.
Uh-huh.
And we didn't get a chance to do it on this trip, but certainly on the next trip, we want to go to the butterfly area where all the monarchs congregate in the wintertime, which I don't know if you've seen pictures of that, but it's you literally walk into this area and you're covered from head to toe.
That is one of the most amazing nature stories in North America. I started to say insect stories, but I'll broaden it out to nature stories. What happens is each year in the fall, in September, September, early October, all the monarchs from North America, all the monarchs from east of the Rockies, they migrate to a specific site in central Mexico in the mountains. And those monarchs who are migrating there have never made that trip before. Monarch butterflies live about 1 year. They've never made that trip before. So how do they find, and as you've said, it's not just a general region of Mexico, it's a specific area.
Very specific.
They congregate there in huge clumps.
Mm-hmm.
And how they find that specific site every year, considering the fact they've never been there before, that's kind of a mystery. There's some theories about maybe it's some kind of prehistoric instinctual knowledge. There's some thoughts about magnetism. Maybe there's some kind of magnetic field. All of that's just theories, but the fact that it happens is a truly amazing feat. And so bringing this up north a little bit, September is a great time to see monarchs coming through Missouri. I mean, you can see them throughout the summer. Sadly, you're not seeing as many as you used to. As I said earlier, they think 90% of the population has disappeared. One thing I read, and I don't know why they chose these 2 states, but it does give you a comparison. It said it would be the equivalent if the entire population of the U.S., except for Ohio and Florida, was wiped out. That is where the monarch population is now. So, like I say, I don't know why they chose Ohio and Florida, but nevertheless, whatever it shows you they're in dire straits. Not too late. Getting back to the milkweed. Milkweed does double benefits. It helps the caterpillars, and then it does help them when they're flying through as adults too. So, real quickly, we talk about pollination. If I have time, pollination, and that's a word we throw out there and we talk about. What pollination is basically is insects, butterflies, and bees. When they go to, they're looking for nectar. Some of them use the pollen. I'll get to that in a minute. But what they go down into the flower trying to get the nectar. The pollen sticks to them, to their fuzz, what they have on their face or bodies. Then they go to another plant, and some of that pollen falls off and rubs off. The example I use, imagine if you're eating barbecue, really saucy barbecue. And then you go to something else and you eat it with your hands, and whatever you touch, you're going to have barbecue sauce on it.
That's right.
That's pollination in a nutshell. They are covered with this pollen, and they go to another plant, and that pollen is deposited, and the plants need that pollen for their reproduction. There's two types of pollen. There's windblown pollen and sticky pollen.
Mm-hmm.
Windblown pollen is what a lot of trees have, like cedar trees and stuff like that. That's blown, or like the oak, the yellow dust on your cars in the spring from oak trees. That's windblown. The sticky pollen is what the insects, it sticks to them, and that goes to other plants. And also the some of the insects use this pollen. They will actually take some of the pollen back to their nests, their hives, or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and they'll make it into balls, put it with their larva, and as their larva develops, they feed on this pollen. So not only are they helping the plants, but sometimes this pollen also helps the insects in their life cycles too.
That's pretty amazing. I mean, that whole life cycle theory. So, in essence, Missouri is in the flight path.
Yes, Missouri is very much in the flight path. And why I say east of the Rocky Mountains, west of the Rocky Mountains, the monarchs go down to, I think it's Baja, that whole, the Monterey, that whole area
Sure.
down there in south of that Mexican Baja Peninsula, stuff like that. I'm not quite, they go down there, but east of the Rockies, yes, all the monarchs go to Mexico. And as I said, yeah, it's just this, why they go. I mean, why don't other insects migrate? I don't know. Why
Mm-hmm.
do they go to the specific spot? We don't know. It's just they do it, and it's one of those things, it's just you can try to figure it out, but you can also just sit back and enjoy it. And that's one thing that all Missourians can do.
Going to your past here a little bit, it wasn't long ago I had somebody on from the Dairy Council, and we talked about how dairy farming was so important to Missouri for so many years. I think Missouri at one point was the fifth largest dairy state in the country. And that's a thing of the past. And unfortunately, just like, what's happening with some of these other things in terms of pollination, the dairy farmers are aging out. And as you well know, having been a dairy farmer, that's a 24/7, 365 occupation.
Oh, yes. And the thing is with dairy farming, the dairy farm I grew up on could not operate today. We milked about 35 to 40 cows. We sold grade C milk, which I don't even know if they buy anymore. I think they use it for butter and cheese and stuff like that. But anyway,
Mm-hmm.
there was a lot of little dairy operations around. Now they're bigger. I mean, you have your multi-hundred cows that they milk,
Mm-hmm.
and they have the pipeline milkers, all this kind of stuff. We just had stainless steel buckets, but yeah, it's very much a commitment. You're right. I mean, it is truly. It's like I told our daughters. We have two grown daughters.
Mm-hmm.
It was twice a day, 7 days a week, 365. Did not matter what the weather was. Did not matter if it was a holiday. Did not matter if we had company. When 4:30 in the evening rolled around, it was time to go to the barn. And in the morning, my dad got up at 4:30 and I got up at 5:30. And I tell you what, Scott, I can still to this day, my alarm clock buzzed a little bit before it actually went off to wake me up so I get ready and go to the barn.
Sure.
That was one of the most hated sounds of my youth. And I still can remember that like it was last week.
Let's see those hands, Francis. They must be very strong, right? Have you got
yeah,
those are still milking hens? Is that
yes. And it was not just the milking, I mean, of course, in the winter we had a pond that I had to cut ice on because it was not spring fed. It was just, there was terrace that water went down into it.
Sure.
And we're talking the winters of the late 1970s, which were very quite brutal, quite bitter.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And and feeding hay, and of course we hauled hay in the summertime. And but getting back to the winter, and again, I've told my daughters, because my wife love winter, and I said, I am honest when I say this, and I don't demean anybody who likes winter. I have very few pleasant memories of winter.
Yeah.
I mean, my memories are feeding cows, cold hands, cold feet, chopping ice, all this kind of stuff. So anyway,
not easy. Well, I married a woman from Rochester, Minnesota, who tells me she loves winter all the time. And I said one of the beauties of her loving winter as much as she does is she can hop on an airplane and fly there in less than an hour, and
right,
she can have all the winter she wants.
Exactly. But yes, the dairy farming was it is true, and it was, you're right, it was a big part of Missouri. Not as much. I mean, we still have dairy farmers today, but it's the smaller dairy farmers like what I grew up on. They've kind of gotten, the industry has moved away from that type of production. and it's just the way things happen. So, but yes, dairy farming was part of my past. Farming was part of my past, and I'm proud to say that too. So.
Well, we got a little off track, but I thought I'd bring in your dairy
Sure.
years, because it's got everything to do with conservation as well. My guest today on Around the Ozarks Spotlight is Francis Skalicky. Francis is head of media for the southwestern part of the state of Missouri for the Conservation Department.
Sorry,
we've been talking about pollination and why that's important, and it is important. And I'm glad you've had a chance to tell people about that and the kinds of things they can do. But there's other things that the Conservation Department is responsible for, and maybe you can touch on those. One that's near and dear to me, because I grew up in northern Wisconsin as a kid. I saw some very brutal winters and saw what it did to things like the deer population in terms of the inability for the population to feed itself to the levels that the population was growing, and why the hunt was so important. And here in Missouri, I'm sure we face a lot of the same things, where I think sometimes people look at conservation as only protecting living things without the other side of conservation, which has to do with how do we weed out some of the living things so the other living things can live on.
Well, yeah, and I think what you're kind of touching on here are non-native species. A thing we hear about in 21st century Missouri are feral hogs. They're not native. They're descendants of domestic hogs. Again, a whole nother show, but very basic. They're descendants of domestic hogs, so they're not wild hog. There's no such thing as wild hog in Missouri. Mm-hmm. Either they're descendants of farm animals, or they've been brought in from other places where they're also descendants of wild animals released on the land. They do a lot of damage, both to habitats and to crops, to pastures, and things like that. That's where we're trying to eliminate them. That's one example of things not here. I mean, you could go zebra mussels. Mm-hmm. You could go some species of carp. You could go plants like kudzu, things like that. I mean, you could go several ways with the things that were not here in pre-settlement times, that because of that have changed the habitat, and how mm-hmm. much. Well, some of the stuff still exists, but there are, things like quail, things like, some of the stuff, the monarch butterflies with the milkweed that are not here because it's being crowded out by non-native species. Mm-hmm. Things have changed. So the more you can go with native plants that were here, the better it is for the habitat. And again, there is an economic, whatever you go with. I mean, we were talking economic value of pollinators, economic values of deer. Deer hunting season is a big deal in Missouri, mm-hmm. From the way of not just hunting permits, but gas, meals, everything hunters spend. Turkey hunting is a big thing. Trout fishing's a big thing. Fishing's a big thing. So however you can go, these outdoor opportunities, bird feeding, bird viewing is a huge economic thing. Think about how much money people spend on bird seed, on bird feeders. Huge economic impact. People love nature. Yeah. So that's why the Conservation Department is important. The things we do is important because it helps keep nature going. So.
It certainly does. Let's go back to those websites again. How do people find the Native Habitat website? What is it?
It's MDC. The where to start is mdc.mo.gov. That's a Missouri Department of Conservation website. And from there, you could, in our search window, you can enter native plants, you can enter hunting, you can enter bass fishing, whatever you do, and it will lead you to a page that deals with it. That's the great thing about the Department of Conservation. We manage the fish, forest, and wildlife resources of the state. Fish, forest, wildlife, that covers a lot of the outdoors. So if you're interested, go to our website, mdc.mo.gov, look up what you're looking for, and it'll probably take you to a page where you can get more knowledge on it.
Francis, we're about out of time. Am I going to be able to have you back and we can cover some other things?
Scott, you have touched on so many things that we've just touched on. We've just touched on the top of them. So yes, please have me back, and we can go into depth on a lot of different topics. I will enjoy it. So
I look forward to it. I've enjoyed this conversation. I want to thank my guests today on Around the Ozarks Spotlight, also my producer, Taylor Worley and Jay Stevens, as well as all of you for joining us. If you happen to miss all or part of today's program, you can always find it in its entirety on MidwestFamilySpringfield.com on the ATO tab at the top of the page. We do now have an ATO app, which you can get on Apple and Android. Just by going to the sites to get apps, and also on AroundTheOzarks.com. You can find today's program along with all the other shows we've done over the last year. Just scroll the page to find the podcast, as well as all the others. I'm Scott Meier, your host. Remember, every day is a gift. Enjoy life. Have a great day. Thanks, Francis.
Thank you.